Alright, so this is going up on the channel as a retro review. I don't think this would be something that anyone would expect or need a retro review of. You can probably hear in my voice that my voice still isn't fully back from the cold that I've been fighting off, which is why there hasn't been any brand new content, and this is the closest to new content, this retro upload review. But it's going up because someone, a fan, a follower, hopefully a fan, but definitely a follower. Someone asked me basically on social media, the algorithm I believe still punishes you, your visibility, if you put up too many things at once or put up too many lower view videos at once, which is why I don't just dump everything onto the channel at once. But anyway, this is going up on there because a viewer said that they were looking for it and couldn't find it among the previous channel versions of the original reviews, and wanted to see it. So I said, sure, I'll get that one back up there. But also the reason that this was not in any of the previous uploads or collections of all the reviews was mainly because I don't think that this review really holds up. This is no longer something that I agree with, which is not a reason for me to hold it back or cover up reviews that I don't agree with. But it's definitely something that I would normally put a preamble like this in front of as a, hey, let's talk about this. Let's get some better new content out of this. Let's actually look back and explore this. But also, this I realize needs a preamble before it because this is an older Bryan Singer movie. And Bryan Singer is one of these filmmakers, one of these, early 2000s Hollywood douchebags who turned out to be kind of a reprehensible guy, and who I didn't really say, hey, Bryan Singer, wow, what a great human being in the review. I also, mentioned that he directed the film, and this kind of needs some context to it, I think. I think that's a responsible thing to do. If I have something up on the channel that's going to be re-uploaded in 2026, you're talking about a guy who we've now found out is an abuser, has some allegations against them. We now know that he probably didn't direct, going back over the review. The main positive thing that was said about him in this review of the film is, oh yeah, hey, Bryan Singer got better at directing action scenes. Well, now we know he probably didn't direct a lot of the better directed parts of this movie, since he's, among other things, certainly not the worst things that have been said about him. Known for walking off sets, disappearing. Certainly not the worst thing he's been accused of. And this is not to say that I think that I need to go back over every single review I've done of older movies where someone involved in the production has turned out to be an awful human being, or we'd be here all month. For years, even. Let's go back and re-review every Kevin Spacey movie, every Johnny Depp movie, every Joss Whedon project. Sure. But, not only now do we live in, supposedly, this age of accountability, but also this age of backlash to accountability, where so much of the awful things in this world, this awful presidential administration we find ourselves in, a lot of the awful things that we see in media now, is this backlash to accountability. One or two guys actually saw some accountability, faced some consequences, and that was apparently so shocking to the system that now we have to hear endlessly about how Me Too went too far. Anyway, as concerns Bryan Singer, it's not like no one was ever saying anything about this guy. People in media, in press, can't go around saying, oh no, we never heard Bryan Singer was a scumbag. Was there anything legally actionable about being said about? No. But it was quote-unquote open secret enough that Family Guy was able to make jokes about it.
Perverted Hollywood directors.
Oh, like Bryan Singer.
Exactly. The point is...
I'll figure out a way in. After all, I snuck into Bryan Singer's birthday party.
Excuse me, how old are you?
Not of legal age anywhere in the world.
Have fun, tell whoever you want. Weirdly, no one cares about this.
Yeah, remember that? So I guess the Family Guy writer's room has bigger balls than a lot of the entertainment news media. Sometimes that's the way it works out. But even leaving aside the Bryan Singer of it, which is obviously the thing most in need of addressing before you go back and revisit reviews of stuff like this, because it makes it feel gross. You go back to look over a review of this and, everything else that you'd want to revisit about this. The number one thing you want to say is, oh yeah, this was a Bryan Singer movie, fuck that guy. But even leaving that aside, I look back over this one, and even a couple years after this movie, I was thinking, man, I was too nice to this movie. Like, it's not a terrible movie. Whoever directed the second unit on this did a passable job. But I look back at this, and I feel like, wow, I was bending over backwards to be nice to this, because even at this point, there was still that instinct to try and not sound like you were just giving the gold standard to the MCU movies. Say, yeah, well, sure, the remainders of these Fox movies can still be pretty good. They haven't even, at this point, I'm pretty sure they haven't even, like, invented the Deadpool movies yet. Have you gone back and watched this one recently? Like, I think it's on, like, TNT or USA or FX pretty regularly still. It is a slog. It's kind of amusing to, look back at it and hear myself talk about how, well, I guess this will probably be the last time we see Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. Turns out, no, probably not. Is this the last time we see Hugh Jackman? Nope. It's pretty, is a thoroughly average, dull sort of movie. Hasn't held up at all. You'd think with how bad Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix turned out that this one would feel so much better, because it is better than those ones, but somehow it has diminished by connection, rather than, I stand by First Class still being the best of the Fox X-Men movies. I know it's cheaper looking, and it doesn't have any of the major actors in it, but it's still the closest that it feels to a real movie with real stakes. It's the only one that doesn't feel like a compromised waste of time, which the rest of them really do feel. I know that we're all glad to see the Fox actors back again, coming back in Doomsday and Secret Wars, and it's going to be fun to see them interacting, wearing cool costumes and whatnot. I enjoyed Deadpool and Wolverine. I thought that was fun. I like Hugh Jackman as an actor. I'm glad he's settled into playing crusty old Wolverine. Anyway, that's why this retro review is being re-uploaded. Didn't really feel right to put it up without some kind of preamble about the fact that I don't really agree with my own bending over backwards to be nice take that I gave it originally. And also, if you're watching this in 2026, the reason that there's not a direct fuck you to Bryan Singer in the original, it's been remastered, of course, with improved audio, some touch-ups to the graphics in the video of the review itself, and the background music that we use now for the new reviews, etc. But if you're wondering why we didn't say, hey, fuck that guy to Bryan Singer in the original review, it's because the original review this was recorded when that movie was new, which was well over a decade ago. So here's the retro review of X-Men Days of Future Past. I no longer agree with the opinions in this review, but here it is. So and Bryan Singer, fuck that jackass. Here we go. Can we all just acknowledge for a minute that it's really fucking weird that this exists? By which I mean it's really fucking weird that it's been like 15 years and the X-Men movies are still locked into the same basic place they were back when they were making the original in 1999. Think about how much the film landscape has changed since then, especially in regards to this genre. Within the same decade and a half that the X-Men movies have been chugging along with the same endlessly repeating themes, same endlessly repeating storyline, and on largely the same basic path, the Marvel movies cycled all the way through their prehistory, their Phase 1, their first big payoff, and 3/4 of Phase 2. There's been 2 Superman reboots. The Christopher Nolan era of DC movies arrived, peaked, and wore out its welcome. Hell, we're on our second Spider-Man. Probably not for much longer, but still. And yet here's X-Men Days of Future Past, still peacocking around like it's only 2000. That time-lost era where The Matrix is still the pinnacle reference point for action scenes, Black Rubber is still the last word in superhero fashion, Bryan Singer is still the next big thing, Wolverine isn't incredibly boring, and being better than the last big one of these is still the same as good enough. That's not to say the movie isn't good, it's pretty good overall, still a major step backwards after the excellent First Class, and practically a joke compared to any superhero movie that hasn't been jogging in place since the Clinton administration, but it's a solid summertime diversion and maybe a nice nostalgia trip if you're still in a mindset where X2 is actually great and not just great ... for when this was as much as you could hope for. The nicest specific compliment I can pay to it is that the film has huge, and I mean huge, story, script, and structural problems, but in sum total is compelling and fun enough that I was willing to force myself to not care in order to better enjoy the broader sweep of it that does work. And when I say story problems, I mean stuff like the entire premise hinging on Kitty Pryde zapping Wolverine's consciousness from the dark near future back through time into his younger 1973 body, and the film never actually explaining how she acquired the ability to do that. No, seriously, it never even comes up, even though she didn't have this power before, and it's not even a little bit related to the power she does have. This is like doing Back to the Future, but instead of giving Marty a time machine, Doc Brown just sent him back, and he wasn't a scientist. and they didn't know each other. If I'm able to look past amateurs writing like that, then the movie must be pretty good. But yeah, that's our basic premise, loosely based on the famous Chris Claremont story of the same name. In the future, things have gone all Terminator, and robot sentinels have blown up the planet hunting down and concentration camping mutants. Supposedly, the whole thing happened because Mystique killed the Sentinels creator Bolivar Trask in the 70s and inadvertently set the stage for the program to come back much worse later on. For reasons that don't even make X-Men sense, the only way to prevent this is to send the series' least interesting but most merchandisable main character back through time in order to bring together the only two men capable of mansplaining Mystique out of her radical course, one of whom is in prison while the other is being whiny and uncooperative because if he didn't, he'd just solve the problem on his own and there'd be no movie. If 2012 was the year movies figured out how to best translate the best aspect of superhero comics continuity, i.e. the ability to merge disparate genres into a whole greater than the sum of its parts, 2014 will go down as the year it absorbed its worst aspect, stories that only exist to move around the pieces for stuff you might want to do later on, or to retroactively rework plot points you've changed your mind about in tediously overcomplicated fashion. Days of Future Past is the second type, as it ultimately becomes clear that the main reason they're bothering with a time travel story is to write themselves a license to do over the events of Part 3 and Wolverine Origins. Well, and also so they can wring one more movie out of young Mystique, since Jennifer Lawrence is a big star now but signed up for this franchise back before she could demand Hunger Games money. Still, all the mucking around in the past is fun, and it's nice to see Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy again. Peter Dinklage gets surprisingly not much to do as Trask, but he makes the most of it even if a movie obsessed with its own canon never bothers to tell us what's going to happen to make him turn into Bill Duke between now and Part 3. And even though Wolverine will never be as worth building movies around as Marvel's accountants would like him to be, Hugh Jackman still makes it work, and yeah, it's nice to get what'll probably be one last big turnout of original cast stalwarts like Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, and well, Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart are fun. I will say that I don't get the whole, whoa, Quicksilver isn't as bad as we thought he'd be thing that the other critics are on about, though. The actor is annoying, his design is terrible, and his big action scene is just a retread of the decade-old bullet time gimmick, made amusing only by an excellently chosen needle-drop music cue. It also makes no sense why they only call this guy and his actually very useful power for one short mission. He's completely extraneous, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if he really is only here so Fox can continue its juvenile character rights pissing contest with Marvel. The weak link turns out to be America's platonic BFF crush herself, though, who could not look more bored and disinterested every time she shows up on screen. Which is a bummer when you remember how good she was as young Mystique the last time, and for that matter, how good Rebecca Romijn was as the original evil Mystique. I mean, geez, wake up, at least pretend you want to be here. At least you don't spend the majority of this movie sitting in a tree. On the plus side, and it's a big plus, Bryan Singer finally learned how to direct big-scale action. Or maybe he just got a better second unit team, but still, it's not the most original or imaginative action, granted, but it's well-staged and it's a lot of fun. The franchise has been around too long, sure, but he's definitely devoted to it, and a certain level of authorial confidence looms large over the whole thing. Hell, maybe too large. In addition to using the film to wipe out the 3 present set installments not directed by him, we also learned that damn near every character from First Class who wasn't the young version of someone from the first 2 was murdered between movies, effectively declaring that there are no X-Men except Bryan Singer's X-Men, which kinda pisses me off since First Class is still the best of these, but what are you gonna do? Still, taken strictly on its own merits, it's pretty good. Decent action movie, good turns from some good actors, moves along at a decent clip, and the Sentinels are fun for what little time they show up. It's probably the third best in the series, even if it is far from any kind of classic. Maybe someday we'll get X-Men movies that more effectively capture, you know, the X-Men. But for now, this is fine, and the post-credits teaser almost makes me excited to see what happens next.